That night was the craziest yet most exciting night of my life. It was a quiet Friday when it happened. I lay on my back, staring at the faint patterns of moonlight on the ceiling, my thoughts scattered and restless. I felt lonely because my wife, Luna, was away on a trip to her mother's abroad. She would be gone for the next 2 months, and I hadn't seen her in 3 weeks. The house felt empty, the silence almost suffocating. It was only when the soft creak of the door broke through the stillness that I realized I wasn't alone. I sat up slightly, squinting toward the faint figure in the doorway. My 19-year-old son, Alex, stood there, his broad shoulders outlined by the dim light from the hallway. He hesitated, one hand gripping the doorframe as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice laced with hesitation. I rubbed my eyes, my heart already tightening at the sound of his voice. "Alex, what's wrong?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood frozen, his shadow stretching across the room. Finally, he stepped inside, his bare feet making soft thuds against the carpet. There was something about the way he moved, hesitant, almost afraid, that made the air in the room feel heavier. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. 2:14 a.m. Alex wasn't the type to wake me unless something was really bothering him. My chest tightened as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, motioning for him to come closer. "What's going on?" I asked gently. He hesitated again before sitting on the edge of the bed, his posture stiff, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. For a moment, I watched him, waiting, but he kept his gaze fixed on the floor. The tension radiating from him was almost palpable. "Alex, you can talk to me," I said softly. "Whatever it is, I'm here." He let out a shaky breath, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his t-shirt. It's hard to explain," he said finally. "I've been feeling something. I've been feeling different, and I don't know what to do about it." His words sent a ripple of unease through me. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. "Different how?" He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine with an intensity one wasn't prepared for. "It's about someone," he said. "Someone I've been thinking about a lot. Someone you're not going to expect." Relief briefly flickered through me. Maybe this was about a girl at school, a crush he didn't know how to handle. Alex had always been shy about his feelings, keeping them bottled up until they threatened to overflow. "Okay," I said, offering him a reassuring smile. "Who is it?" "Someone from school." He shook his head quickly, his gaze dropping again. "No," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's not someone from school." "Then who?" I pressed gently, though a strange unease was beginning to creep into my chest. "Alex, you can tell me. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as if he were gathering every ounce of courage he had. When he spoke again, his voice was trembling. "It's you, Dad," he said finally. "It's always been you." The words hit me like a tidal wave, pulling the air from my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't think. My mind raced to make sense of what he'd just said, but the sheer weight of it left me reeling. "Alex," I began, my voice faltering. What are you saying?" He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. His hands ran through his hair, tugging at the strands as though trying to physically pull the words from his mind. "I know how it sounds," he said quickly. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. I've tried. I've tried for so long to push it away, to ignore it, but it's always there." I stared at him, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear his words. "Alex, this isn't... Don't tell me it's not real," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "I know what I feel. I've never felt this way about anyone else. It's not just admiration or some stupid crush. It's something way deeper, Dad." "Alex," I said again, my voice trembling. "You're my son. What you're feeling, it's not love. It's something else. Something." "It is love," he shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "You're everything to me, Dad. You're the only one who's ever understood me, the only one who's ever made me feel like I'm worth something." How can that not be love? Tears stung my eyes as I tried to process his words. My son, my sweet boy, whom I had raised and loved unconditionally, was pouring out feelings I couldn't understand, feelings I couldn't reciprocate. And yet, something in me stirred. Now, looking back, I think I didn't notice it at the time. I think I tried to ignore it. Alex, I said, you're confused. You're going through a lot right now, and maybe these feelings. I'm not confused, he said, turning to face me. His eyes were glassy with unshed tears, his jaw set with a determination that made my chest ache. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. At that moment, I noticed it. I could feel the way he was attracted to me, and I didn't want to turn away from it. But still, as his father, I took responsibility to ignore it. I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Alex, I said gently, these feelings, they'll pass. I promise you they'll pass. And when they do, you'll see things more clearly. What if they don't? He whispered, his voice breaking. What if this is who I am? What if this is how I'm supposed to feel? My throat tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I didn't have the answers he was searching for, didn't know how to ease the pain that was so evident in his eyes. All I could do was hold on to the hope that time would bring clarity, that this moment wouldn't define us. You're not alone in this, I said finally, my voice trembling but resolute. We'll get through it, Alex. Together. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. I don't want to lose you, Dad, he said softly. I can't lose you. You won't, I said firmly, squeezing his arm. No matter what, I'll always be here. You know what? I added, trying to lighten the mood. Why don't you join me for tonight? Maybe that would help a bit. I turned myself back under the sheets, and he nodded, slowly stepping into the bed. Then I grabbed him, pulling him close to me. I felt something I didn't mention to him, of course. So I just said, "Good night." And he smiled at me. The silence that followed was heavy but not unbearable. It was the kind of silence that held promises, fragile but sincere. And as he closed his eyes, I felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that we could weather the storm, no matter how impossible it seemed. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. And I was right. A night like this was coming again, which would end in a totally different way. That night, nothing happened, but there was more coming. Because love, especially love as complicated as this, doesn't fade quietly. It demands to be reckoned with. And I had no idea what that reckoning would look like. The morning after Alex's confession felt surreal. The quiet of the house, usually comforting, now pressed down on me like a suffocating weight. Every corner, every familiar object seemed to hum with the unspoken tension between us. I busied myself with chores, hoping the routine would ground me. But my hands trembled as I folded laundry, and my mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What did this mean for us? For him? For me? The clatter of a chair in the kitchen jolted me from my thoughts. Alex was sitting at the table, staring into a bowl of cereal that looked as untouched as my cup of coffee on the counter. His hair was unkempt, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He hadn't slept, and neither had I. "Morning," I said cautiously, breaking the silence. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he replied, his voice hoarse. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, the sound of the liquid filling the mug louder than it should have been. I joined him at the table, the distance between us feeling both too far and too close. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with everything unsaid. Finally, I broke the silence. "Alex, about last night. I meant what I said." He interrupted, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his eyes. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't." I closed my eyes briefly, willing myself to stay calm. "I know you're being honest," I said softly. "But Alex, what you're feeling, it's not something we can act on. It's not something we should act on." He leaned back in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Why not?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Why does love have to fit into rules and boundaries? Isn't love supposed to be free? I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. Love isn't just about what we feel, Alex, I said. It's about what's right, what's good for everyone involved. And this, what you're saying, it could hurt us both. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I don't want to hurt you, he said quietly. That's the last thing I want. I know, I said, reaching across the table to place a hand over his. And I don't want to hurt you either. That's why we have to handle this carefully. We need to find a way to move past this. His fingers tightened around mine, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who'd held my hand when he was scared, who'd looked to me for guidance and comfort. But this was different. The way he looked at me now was different. I don't know if I can move past it, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But I'll try. For you.